Bullies mess with quiet girl, not knowing she's a brutal fighter. Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories. The yellow school bus rumbled to a stop in front of Brooklyn High. Its brakes hissing like the deep breath of a tired beast. The doors creaked open, and the flood of students poured out, spilling onto the sidewalk with all the noise and chaos of the first day of school. Laughter echoed, shoes scraped against the pavement, and the familiar rhythm of the high school day began. Yet amidst the rush of students, there was one who didn't quite belong to the frantic hustle, the girl stepping off last. Her backpack slung lazily over one shoulder, her face unreadable as the bustling crowd seemed to part around her. Barely noticing her, Amani Brooks took a steadying breath, her dark eyes scanning the towering brick facade of the school in front of her. It wasn't much different from the schools she'd known back in Chicago, crowded hallways. Kids clustered in their familiar cliques, the noise buzzing in the air like static, but here, in this unfamiliar place, she was an outsider, just another new kid trying to blend in. She wasn't here for friends. She wasn't here for the spotlight. She was here to finish her senior year and leave it all behind. The rules were simple, and she had learned them well: keep your head down, stay out of trouble, and don't make a scene. That had been her mantra in every new school she'd attended, and she planned to stick to it here. As she moved toward the entrance, the familiar sensation hit, eyes on her, whispers floating through the air like invisible daggers, slicing through the otherwise indifferent chatter. She didn't need to look at them to know what they were thinking. A new face in the crowd was always a curiosity, but it was different when you were the only black girl in a sea of mostly white faces. The stares weren't just curious, they were calculating. What kind of person was she? Would she be the loud, aggressive stereotype they expected, or would she be different? Amani ignored them, her gaze unwavering as she walked down the hallway, searching for her locker. But then she saw them. Jessica Carter, the name had already been whispered on the bus, accompanied by furtive glances. Jessica wasn't just popular, she was the queen of the school. The one who called the shots. The one whose opinion determined who mattered and who didn't. Flanking her were Monica and Ava, her loyal shadows, always in tow, always ready to follow her lead. But what really caught Amani's attention was the presence of two boys: Ryan Carter, Jessica's older brother, broad-shouldered and the star quarterback, exuding an air of untouchability, and Trey Morales, the cocky, sharp-eyed boy who never seemed to know when to keep his mouth shut. Amani didn't intend to get involved with any of them, so she turned her attention back to her locker, spinning the dial of her combination lock. But even as she did, she could feel Jessica's gaze on her, appraising, calculating, as though the wheels were already turning. Amani didn't care. She wasn't here for drama. She was here to finish her year and leave, unnoticed, just like she had always done. The bell rang, signaling the start of her first day at Brooklyn High, and the crowded hallway buzzed with energy. The air thick with excitement, nervousness, and the sounds of sneakers skidding across the polished floor. Amani, unfazed by the chaos around her, stood at the entrance for a moment longer than she meant to, letting the scene unfold before her. The yellow school bus that had dropped her off at the curb now sat empty behind her, its engine still humming in the background like a memory of her old life. The school stood before her, tall, imposing, its brick walls casting long shadows across the courtyard. It was just another high school, the same as all the others she had endured. Yet something about this place felt different, felt heavier. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, settling it more comfortably over her shoulder, and took a long, steady breath. It was a ritual now, the slow inhale, the steady exhale, a reminder that she was ready for whatever came next. This was just another chapter, nothing more, nothing less. She had done this before, too many times to count, changing schools, blending in, keeping to herself. She had no intention of changing that now. She wasn't here to make friends, wasn't here to be noticed. She was here for one reason: to finish her senior year and escape unnoticed. Her eyes scanned the looming hallways, packed with students, all of them seemingly oblivious to her presence as they drifted in their clusters, catching up on summer stories and making last-minute plans. The energy of the school hit her immediately, students moving in tight-knit packs, laughing, joking, rushing to their next classes. It was the familiar rhythm of high school, but it wasn't the same when you were an outsider. The whispers, the stares, the questions floating in the air like ripples in water. They followed her every move. New girl, black girl, she could feel it. The weight of their eyes was heavier here. Sharper. They weren't just looking at her. They were assessing her, sizing her up in ways she couldn't control. They wanted to know what kind of person she was. Was she loud? Was she aggressive? Or was she just another quiet girl trying to fade into the background? Amani wasn't fazed. She had mastered the art of ignoring the stares, the whispers, the sideways glances. She had learned to keep her gaze ahead, focused, unwavering, never acknowledging the invisible weight of expectation pressing down on her. As she walked toward her locker, she pushed the noise out of her mind. Nothing mattered more than getting through this day without being noticed, without standing out. She found her locker, its number etched in her memory. As she twirled the dial of the combination lock, a sharp, familiar voice broke through the hum of the hallway, pulling her attention away from the locker. There she was, Jessica Carter. The name had already been whispered on the bus ride in. The way students glanced at her, mixed with a combination of admiration and caution. Jessica wasn't just another girl, she was the queen of the school. The one everyone knew and, if they were smart, feared. Her presence was commanding, her smile knowing, the kind that said she could take you down with a look if she felt like it. And she didn't come alone. Monica and Ava, always flanking her, always hovering like shadows. Amani didn't even bother to look in their direction as she focused back on her locker. But she felt Jessica's gaze linger on her, cold and calculating. Jessica was sizing her up. She was trying to figure out how to take her down, or at least how to make her submission obvious. Amani didn't flinch. She wasn't here to be anyone's victim. She was here to finish her year and leave. And if that meant surviving in silence, she could do that too. The whispers continued, but Amani kept her gaze ahead, pretending she didn't hear them, pretending she didn't feel the weight of their curiosity pressing against her back. As the hallway continued to move around her, she let the noise wash over her, unbothered, focused on nothing but her locker and the quiet promise she had made to herself: survive. Amani's first day at Brooklyn High hadn't even finished before the whispers about her started to spread. She could feel it in the way the students looked at her as they shuffled through the hallways between classes, their eyes darting in her direction before quickly looking away, the weight of their curiosity palpable in the air. But the real moment came during lunch, when the true power dynamics of the school were laid bare. As Amani walked into the cafeteria, she noticed Jessica Carter almost immediately. There she was, sitting with her usual entourage, exuding that effortless air of superiority that came with her status as the queen bee. Jessica wasn't just popular, she was untouchable, the gravitational center around which the entire social order of the school revolved. Amani didn't seek confrontation. She didn't want to be anyone's target. And she wasn't here to make waves. So, she chose an empty table in the corner, hoping for a moment of peace amidst the chaos. She sat down, unpacked her lunch, and ate in silence, tuning out the noise of laughter and conversation around her. For a few moments, it felt like the world could spin on without noticing her. But then, like clockwork, it happened. The laughter changed, sharpened, became louder. It was a shift she could feel in her bones before she even heard it. The shift that meant she was now the focus of someone's game. Well, look at this. Jessica's voice rang out, smooth and dripping with amusement, breaking through the din of the cafeteria. Amani didn't flinch, didn't even look up. She kept eating, her movements steady, unbothered, as if Jessica's words meant nothing at all. "Oh, is the new girl shy?" Monica chimed in, her voice sweet but laced with mockery. "I think she's just stuck up," Ava added, her tone dripping with disdain, acting like she's too good to talk to people. The cafeteria was listening now, the hum of voices quieting as Jessica's crew put on their little performance. The attention was on Amani, and she knew it, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply continued eating, her gaze focused on her plate, as though the words flying around her had no more weight than the air itself. Then, Trey Morales, always eager to stir the pot, jumped in. "Maybe she doesn't speak English," he mocked, the smirk on his face clearly visible as he leaned in. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Ryan Carter, the quarterback, joined in, leaning casually against the table next to hers, his tone oozing with superiority. "Or maybe she's just slow," he drawled, as if the idea of a girl like Amani even existing was a joke to him. The cafeteria roared with laughter at the cruel jokes, and Jessica's eyes locked onto Amani, waiting, watching, desperate for any sign of weakness. She wanted a reaction. She needed it. The game was only fun if Amani responded, if she cowered or, at the very least, got angry. But Amani didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, Amani took a slow sip of her juice, the calmness of her movements like a deliberate rebuke to their chaos. Then, as if nothing had happened, she set the cup down, wiped her mouth, and calmly stood up. Her movement was graceful, measured, controlled, everything they expected and nothing like what they wanted. Without sparing them a single glance, she picked up her tray, walked to the trash, and dropped it in, the soft clink of the tray in the bin echoing through the stillness that had suddenly settled over the room. Then, she laughed, quiet, almost to herself, the sound barely rising above the hushed whispers. The laughter that followed wasn't triumphant or mocking, it was forced. Uneasy. The room had expected her to break, to crumble under the weight of their taunts. But she hadn't. She'd simply walked away. For the first time, Jessica Carter felt a flicker of uncertainty. Her usual confidence faltered, just for a moment, as she watched Amani walk out of the cafeteria. Unshaken, untouched. The power dynamic had shifted. But Jessica couldn't quite understand why. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Amani. But the tension in the air was undeniable. It was like a storm was brewing. And she could feel it with every step she took. The whispers, the glances, the murmur of her name in the hallways. She was no longer just the quiet new girl. No, now she was a challenge. The energy had shifted, and she could feel the pressure closing in on her like a vice. She wasn't just an outsider anymore, she was the target. The one who had broken the unspoken rule by refusing to play along with the usual high school drama. The moment she walked into school the next morning, she knew things were different. The stares were sharper, the whispers more frequent, and the curious glances turned into more pointed, even fearful, gazes. It didn't take long for Jessica to make her move. She and her crew had spent the day scheming, whispering among themselves as they plotted their next move. The strategy was clear: push harder. After all, Jessica wasn't used to being ignored. She wasn't used to being the one on the outside. She needed to remind Amani, and everyone else, that she was still in control. That she was still the one who called the shots. By the time gym class rolled around, the tension was palpable. Monica and Ava, always lurking in the background, started making their moves. A careless elbow here, a shove there, just enough to annoy, to provoke, to test Amani's resolve. Amani didn't flinch. She didn't even acknowledge them. She simply kept moving, kept playing, her focus unbroken. But with every subtle jab, they pushed a little harder. During basketball, Ryan saw his chance. As the game unfolded, he made sure to be where Amani was, always taking the ball from her the moment she touched it, shoving her hard enough to make her stumble. Each time, he did it with a grin, a smirk playing on his lips, as if to say, "You don't belong here." Trey, always looking for a laugh, egged him on, mocking, "Damn, new girl, do you even know how to play?" Amani didn't respond. She just took it. No anger, no frustration, just a quiet, almost bored look on her face. Like it didn't matter. And that was what made it worse. This wasn't submission. This was control. Jessica watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, her jaw clenched. Every shove, every taunt from her crew seemed to bounce off Amani like water off a stone. The new girl wasn't reacting the way she was supposed to. She wasn't breaking. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't even angry. And that was the real problem. By lunch, the pressure had reached its breaking point. Jessica was done playing games. The humiliation needed to be real. It needed to be undeniable. She had pushed and prodded, but Amani refused to crack. Now, she was going to make sure everyone knew who was in charge. As Amani stood to grab her tray, it happened, a hard shove from behind. Her tray flew from her hands, crashing to the ground, food splattering across the floor. The entire cafeteria froze for a heartbeat. The sound of the tray hitting the floor ringing in the silence like a death knell. Then, the laughter began. It started low, unsure, but quickly built into the familiar, cruel chorus that echoed through the room. Jessica stepped forward, towering over Amani like a predator closing in on its prey. "Oh no," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Did the poor little new girl drop her lunch? That's so sad. Monica and Ava were already laughing, their faces twisted with amusement. Ryan leaned against a nearby table, arms crossed, his smirk widening. Trey had his phone out, recording the scene like it was some kind of performance. The entire cafeteria was watching. This was it, the moment Amani was supposed to break. But she didn't. She stood there, still as stone, fists clenched at her sides, her breath steady, her eyes calm. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. And then, slowly, she looked up at Jessica. A small, almost imperceptible smile played at the corner of her lips. Not one of amusement, but something colder, something dangerous. Jessica felt a shiver race down her spine. She wanted to see fear in Amani's eyes. But instead, she saw something that unsettled her more than anything: control. Amani bent down, calmly picked up her tray, and without breaking eye contact, walked away. The cafeteria erupted in laughter again. But this time it wasn't the same. The sound was hollow, unsure. Jessica's smile faltered as she watched Amani's retreating figure. She hadn't won. She hadn't even come close. And for the first time, Jessica wasn't sure what to do with herself. Amani had done something that Jessica couldn't have predicted. She hadn't just ignored her. She had left her, untouched, unshaken, and in doing so, she had taken the power back. By the next day, the atmosphere at Brooklyn High was charged with something electric. A quiet tension that hummed through the hallways like a storm waiting to break. Amani could feel it the moment she stepped onto campus, the way the students' gazes followed her, lingering with curiosity, some with a hint of apprehension. She wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was the target, the one everyone was waiting to see crack. But she didn't flinch. She walked through the halls, head held high, her demeanor unbothered. Jessica, however, wasn't done. Her crew, Monica, Ava, Ryan, and Trey, had decided to turn up the heat. Subtle bumps, taunts, and shoves escalated throughout the day. In gym, they would accidentally knock into Amani. In the hallways, they'd make sure to brush too close. A game of push and shove meant to provoke. But Amani stayed calm, her focus unwavering. She didn't give them the satisfaction of a response. Not even when Ryan shoved her during basketball, or when Trey mocked her after every play. Each time, she stayed in control, her indifference only adding fuel to the fire. Jessica watched, frustrated. She had expected Amani to snap, to react, but Amani did nothing but move forward, untouched, her silence louder than any retaliation. Jessica's anger simmered, and the crowd of students, once laughing at Amani's expense, was beginning to notice the quiet strength in her refusal to bend. The shift had already begun. The game wasn't just about humiliating Amani anymore, it was about breaking her. And it was clear that Jessica was losing. By the time lunch arrived, Jessica was determined to make Amani break. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual chaos. But there was a palpable undercurrent of anticipation. As Amani picked up her tray and began to walk to her seat, Jessica seized her moment. A sharp shove from behind sent Amani stumbling, her tray flying, food splattering across the floor in a perfect, humiliating mess. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, every eye on Amani as she stood frozen in the center of the chaos. Then, the laughter began, louder, sharper. Jessica stepped forward, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Did the poor little new girl drop her lunch?" she taunted, basking in the attention. But Amani didn't flinch. She didn't get angry or embarrassed. Instead, she calmly bent down, picked up her tray, and, without a word, walked away, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. Jessica watched, her smile faltering as Amani's cool, controlled departure rattled her. For the first time, Jessica felt a shiver of doubt. She had expected victory, but instead, she was met with a quiet, dangerous kind of strength that made her question everything. The game had changed. Amani hadn't been broken, she had taken control. The tension reached its peak by the end of the day. Jessica had been stewing over Amani's calm defiance. And now, she was ready to end it once and for all. Behind the gym, away from the prying eyes of teachers and cameras, the fight would happen. Word had spread fast, and soon, a crowd of eager students gathered. Eager for a show, Jessica stood at the center, her arms crossed, the familiar smug look on her face. Her crew, Monica, Ava, Ryan, and Trey, hovered around her, ready for the spectacle to begin. Amani appeared, walking with her usual steady, measured steps, the confidence in her gait drawing all eyes to her. Jessica smirked, thinking she had the upper hand. "You actually showed up," she sneered. "I thought you'd just run away like yesterday." Amani didn't flinch. "I wasn't running," she replied, her voice cold and unwavering. Jessica, frustrated by Amani's calm, jabbed back. "You think throwing food on someone is a fight?" But Amani wasn't interested in sparring with words. She was here for something else. As Jessica stepped forward, intent on starting the fight, Amani spoke the words that froze the air between them. "I'm here to warn you." Jessica scoffed, dismissing her, but the uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Then, as Ryan moved to engage, Amani moved like lightning. Before he could land a punch, she expertly twisted his wrist, flipping him to the ground with effortless precision. The crowd gasped in shock, and Jessica's smug expression faltered. Next came Trey, charging forward with all his bravado. But Amani sidestepped him, grabbing his arm mid-swing and locking it in a painful hold. He cried out, stumbling away, his arrogance shattered. The crowd was silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. Jessica was left standing there, her dominance slipping through her fingers as Amani remained unshaken, her voice calm and cutting. "Do you still think I was running?" Amani had just proven something Jessica had never expected: she had won, without even needing to fight. The next day, Brooklyn High felt different. The usual hum of voices in the hallways was punctuated by whispers. More cautious this time, as if the school itself was holding its breath. Amani moved through the crowds with her usual calm, unfazed by the lingering gazes that followed her. But the shift was undeniable. Jessica, once the center of attention, now walked the halls with an unfamiliar weight pressing on her shoulders. The whispers weren't about her anymore. They were about Amani, about how the quiet girl had dismantled her with just a few swift moves. Jessica tried to hold on to the illusion of control, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. At lunch, she sat at her usual table, her shoulders stiff, barely touching her food. Monica and Ava sat in silence beside her, their loyalty now uncertain. Ryan and Trey, bruised and humiliated, kept their distance, nursing their egos more than their wounds. The once loyal crowd that had rallied around Jessica was gone, replaced by a quiet tension in the air. Amani, however, sat alone at her usual spot, just as she had before. She wasn't trying to prove anything, wasn't seeking attention. She ate her lunch quietly. The chaos of the previous days now just another chapter in her journey. But something had changed. Students who had once looked at her with curiosity or disdain now nodded in respect as they passed. Some of the girls who would never have given her the time of day were suddenly eyeing her with a mix of awe and hesitation. And Jessica, sitting at her table, could feel it, the shift. The realization that for the first time, she wasn't the one everyone was watching. It was Amani's name being whispered behind her back now. And Jessica had no idea how to reclaim the power she had lost. Amani had moved on, leaving Jessica to wrestle with a truth she hadn't expected: the fight wasn't over. And she had already lost. The next morning, the weight of defeat hung heavily in the air at Brooklyn High. Jessica walked the hallways with a forced air of confidence. But it didn't fool anyone, not even herself. The whispers that followed her were no longer filled with admiration or fear, but with doubt. She could feel the stares on her back, the once familiar buzz of power now replaced by a creeping unease. People weren't talking about her anymore. They were talking about Amani, about how she had taken down Jessica without raising a finger, how she had turned the tables in a way no one had ever seen before. Jessica sat at her usual spot in the cafeteria, her back straight, but the atmosphere was different. Monica and Ava avoided her gaze, the loyalty they once had now fraying at the edges. Ryan and Trey sat nearby, their pride wounded, their earlier bravado gone. The energy around the table was tense, uncertain. Jessica's mind raced, scrambling to find a way to reclaim her throne. But she knew it wasn't the same anymore. Across the room, Amani sat alone, as she always did, eating her lunch with the same calm, quiet composure. But this time, people weren't ignoring her. A few students from the basketball team nodded in respect as they passed. And even some of the girls who once wouldn't have looked at Amani twice now hesitated, glancing her way with curiosity or admiration. Jessica's fingers clenched around her fork as the realization hit her hard. Amani wasn't just the new girl anymore. She wasn't just surviving, she had conquered. And without even trying, Amani had become the focus. And Jessica, for the first time in years, was no longer the one everyone was watching. No matter what she tried, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. She had lost. And it wasn't just the fight. It was everything.